welcome back. Happy November. I don't know if it's No Shave November for you, David, or not, but welcome back. Last week we missed you and we had Sean on. This week we're missing Sean. But we're going to start a new series. And out of full transparency and fairness, as the team was talking about it of, hey, we've done advisor transitions in the weeds. We've done broker dealers in the weeds. And I wouldn't say called those two subsets out, but we really got granular. And so why not do the same with firms like ours? And this isn't necessarily a promotion of Trusted Visions. That certainly helps. But I thought it was a good month to really dig into in the weeds with third-party recruiting firms. And it was an interesting week last week, David, in that I was with a large group, and a few of those advisors had, asked me at the end of the day, hey, I've worked with other third parties. Why are you here? Because my third party didn't get this involved in the process. And so we started talking through that, and it aligned well with this month's topic of, there's great third-party recruiting firms, and there's some that may just throw your name out to separate broker-dealers just to try and get paid. And if you're okay with that as our audience, as an OSJ enterprise or, individual advisor, that's okay. But go into it with realistic expectations and understand what you need from what I would call those subject matter experts. So, David, I'm going to start with you for our audience. Why even use a third-party recruiting firm versus going to the broker-dealer or doing your own due diligence?
You bet. The biggest thing that always pops up in my head is time. Time is the biggest it's the biggest asset that you're going to get working with a third-party recruiter. Because when you're looking at anytime you're trying to explore an option or you're trying to figure out what's going on out there and you really want to get a good feel, working with an independent third-party recruiter is going to get you that. They're going to be able to, working with a good one is going to ask you a lot of difficult questions, is really going to narrow your focus and get you a little bit closer where you need to be. I think you've used it as an example before. You wouldn't go out and try to buy $1 million home on your own. In a lot of cases, you're going to find a realtor, you're going to find experts, subject matter experts that work in that arena, have their ear to the fire on a lot of cases, and really understand what's going on in the industry. Because if you haven't made a move in quite some time, it could be a daunting process, as we talked many, many times. Anybody that ever says, hey, this will be easy, it's like buying a new car. No, it's not. It's a daunting process, and you really have to get through it. And working with the right partner can really get you a much narrow focus and get your time spent. The due diligence process is daunting in its own. Being able to narrow that down and shorten that time frame is going to help you a ton, because every advisor, every OSJ, everybody we work with just does not have the time to go out there and work with every single corporate recruiter and kind of weed through the good, the bad, and the ugly themselves. Having an expert on your side that's going to work as a consultant, not as somebody that's trying to sell you something, they're going to really find out what's a good fit for you and what direction you should go. So that's going to be a huge factor, is time on that side of it. And we've talked time and time again about having a plan B. It doesn't matter where you're at, what broker dealer you're currently with, or what your situation is. You should always have a plan B. We talk about succession planning, financial planning, and everything else in our business is all about planning. And if you don't have a plan B, or at least have an advocate or somebody you can contact to establish a plan B, it's going to be a difficult process for you, because sometimes you won't have the time available to do the right due diligence if there's a change in the marketplace, or your broker dealer gets sold, or they decide to make some really big significant changes that affects your business immensely. You've got to be able to have the time available to do the research that goes along with it. And if you don't have a plan B, or at least have your toes in the water of what's going on in the world, and maybe a couple broker dealer options, you're doing yourself an injustice. And what I say, because I grew up on the insurance side of the world, it's all about protection. You can have a great sound financial plan, but if you don't have insurance or anything else to protect that plan, it's going to be a difficult process. And that's exactly what you're doing in this situation. Working with a third-party recruiter, you're protecting your business and you're protecting your clients. By having that plan B gives you that protection, gives you the availability of saying, hey, if something does happen, I do have an option, or I at least have a direction. So even, having a couple of third-party recruiters that you have in your Rolodex just in case is not a bad place to be. It allows you to do a little bit of due diligence on them to find out if they're a decent partner to work with. And it kind of sets the mood on being able to even start the process of putting together a plan B. In addition to that, everything always equates back to time. And when you start looking at corporate recruiters, we were both there, we've both been there. I'm not saying anything negative about corporate recruiters, but if you start reaching out, if you're working with the wrong third-party recruiting firm, in a lot of cases, they could be throwing your name out to, a dozen different broker dealers out there. Now you've got calls coming in left and right. Getting the due diligence and trying to get you engaged in conversations and things like that. And working with the right third-party recruiter can keep you at arm's length. Having those good conversations with the third-party recruiter up front, basically saying, hey, I'm dipping my toe in the water. I'm not interested in talking with any corporate recruiters at this point, but I want to get kind of my feet underneath me, figure out what direction I want to go before I start having those conversations. Because if not, again, you're wasting your time and spinning your wheels and getting involved with a lot of in-depth conversations that could, be pointing you completely in the wrong direction. Because in some cases, it's not about what broker dealer you choose to go with. In some cases, it's also, you've got to negate and find out, the 10 or 12 or 14 broker dealers you cannot work with because it just doesn't fit your book of business. That's just as important as finding you the right broker dealer, is determining which ones would not be a decent option for you to start with in the first place. Saves you a ton of time. And that's really the why. Work with a subject matter expert that's going to help you kind of navigate the complexities that go along with it, and hopefully save you a bunch of time, get you to the right people at the right time with the right message, and hopefully be able to find a place that you can call home for the future.
Yeah, and those are great points, David. One thing I would add on, and you tell me if this is a fair statement, the other good why to it is, as you mentioned, a lot of us third-party recruiters have spent the shoes in those corporate recruiters' shoes. And so we can help negotiate, in a lot of instances, better deals as it pertains to payouts or pricing or transition money. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's an ever-changing environment. Not only, we run into that constantly about, I need to find a new home. I would like to find a new mom and pop shop. Gone are the days of the mom and pop shop. So you've got to look past that. And in a lot of cases, looking at not only the payouts, the transition packages, the technology that goes along with it, but then also trying to find those right partnerships, because you can get to the point where it's like, if I want all the technology, I want all the infrastructure, I want all the bells and whistles that come along with being with a really top tier broker dealer. Well, in some cases, that is your only option, is to go with a top tier broker dealer. But on top of that, maybe be able to find that partnership, that OSJ relationship, that branch relationship that's going to give you that mom and pop feel, give you the availability to leverage not only your transition package in a lot of cases, but also economies of scale. There's a lot of benefits that go along with that by being able to negotiate both sides of that. As difficult it is as it is to find a right broker dealer, sometimes finding that subset or that OSJ or that branch inside of a large broker dealer is a better choice than you would have, versus in some cases going to a small broker dealer that has less technology, less infrastructure, but you get that mom and pop feel. And then 2 years later, they end up being sold and you're right back to that same broker dealer or a different broker dealer you didn't want to be with in the first place. Yep. It can take some control away from you. Not saying it's a bad thing, but there's a lot of ways to slice it nowadays.
Yeah, and those are great points, David. And I'm going to move on to the next subtopic within this week's podcast, is the good and the bad of third-party recruiting firms. And I've always categorized this, and you and I know a lot of great third-party recruiting firms out there. And so I've always separated, there's two categories of third-party recruiting firms. There's those third-party recruiting firms that had great success in corporate America, always exceeded goal, made great money, just got tired of the frequent and constant changes of compensation or structure or whatever, that say, it's time for me to go out on my own and really be in control of my own destiny. And that's really the Trusted Visions team, amongst others. And then the other category of third-party recruiting firms is and I'm sorry if anybody takes offense to this, it's just the reality, is there's those that really never hit goal in corporate America, that jumped from job to job because they couldn't hit goal or recruit successfully. And so they were left with little to no option but to go out and start their own third-party recruiting firm because they kind of ran out of corporate America options. And so that's how I always categorize them. And for our audience, I think it's important when talking to firms like Trusted Visions, ask those questions of them of, hey, how many broker dealers do you have relationships with? And I caveat that is a lot of firms out there, sit out there and advertise, we have thousands of broker dealer relationships. Well, okay. I'll be completely transparent. Trusted Visions, we don't partner with every broker dealer out there, and that's by design because we want to understand their long-term vision. So don't let that be a bait and hook of they have thousands of broker dealer relationships, because how many are they really going to introduce you to? The second question to really determine the good from the bad is how accessible is your consultant? And what I mean by that is, when you're going through this process, the due diligence process, in many instances, you built relationships and friendships with your current broker dealer. This isn't just a business decision for you. This is an emotional decision, and you're going to go through a roller coaster of emotions as you go through that process. And having a consultant that's going to be there not just from 8 to 5, but when a question pops up at 7 o'clock, when a question pops up at 10 o'clock, are they accessible? And test them from that perspective of, if they say they're accessible, text them at 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. My wife always makes fun of me. We've got a few large groups that are committed at this point, and the phone starts ringing at 7 o'clock at night now, and she's like, pretty much every night, she says, it's starting again, isn't it? I'm like, yep, because that's what separates the good from the bad. The other thing I would say that really separates the good from the bad is ask those third-party recruiting firms how many firms they're going to introduce you to. Because to your point, David, even if you're working with a third-party recruiting firm, if they're going to sit there and throw your name out to 10, 15 different broker dealers, A, they're not listening to what you really need and what you're desiring long-term for your practice and your clients. And B, it's doing you a disservice, because you're going to have, if they're introducing you to 10 firms, you're spending at minimum 10 hours going through and having a conversation with each of those broker dealers. And by the time you have that 10th conversation, you don't remember that first conversation and what the value prop is. So point blank, ask them, how many firms are you going to introduce me to? Because the principle with Trusted Visions is, if we do our job, we should never be introducing you to more than 2 or 3 firms at a time. Now, we have other options, but we found if we're truly listening and categorizing what's important to you, then as we sit out there and publicize that we keep a pulse on the industry, well, if we keep a pulse on the industry and we've listened, we shouldn't have to introduce you to more than 2 or 3 firms. The last thing I would say that really, and it's kind of comical, this week it happened as well. We were working with a large group, and we went to talk to them about a broker dealer, and the broker dealer said, oh, they've already been introduced to us by another third party. So I went back to the client and I said, hey, I just wanted to check with you. If you're working with another third party, that's totally fine. But I'm trying to get numbers, and I need to know which firms you've been introduced to. And this individual was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know any third-party recruiting firm that I've had a conversation with in the last 6 months. And so that's my last point from the good and the bad. Ask those consultants, or tell them, because you are the client. And just as you serve your clients and they direct you and your services, tell those consultants whether you're ready for them to start submitting your name to these broker dealers. Because what happens is a lot of the, I'm not going to say bad, but less than average or stellar third-party recruiting firms, they have an initial conversation and they just start throwing your name out to every broker dealer out there because they're trying to protect that lead for them and not keeping your best interest in mind. So that's what I would say, things to ask and questions to ask, and really how to find the good versus the bad. Anything to add there, David?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. What it comes down to is, if you feel like they're not asking the same kind of, poignant questions that you would ask a client on trying to figure out what their goals, needs, wishes, ambitions, what the future looks like, things like that. And then they're asking you difficult questions like what keeps you up at night, things like that. Then you may not be working with the right firm, for the simple fact of you want them to ask you a bunch of questions. You want them to understand your business, because like anything else, if they don't understand you, your clients, your infrastructure, geographic location, what have you, it's going to be very difficult for any third-party recruiter to be successful to get you connected to another broker dealer. And again, you're going to be wasting your time. And in a lot of cases, we've been in this business long enough. You've been in this business long enough. If you're working with somebody that's always trying to pound a square peg in a round hole constantly and trying to make that paycheck, it's a difficult situation to run into. And we've all seen it, even on the advisor side. You've got those younger advisors, they'll sell anything they can get their hands on for the simple fact that they've got to make a commission and be able to make that month's mortgage payment, things like that. But you want to work with a firm that doesn't put the emphasis on how much money they're making or what goes into it. It's a long-term relationship in our industry, and it all comes down to finding the right fit for themselves. Like you said, it was such a personal. You built so many personal relationships with the people you work with currently. Why would you not want to have the opportunity to do that same thing if you're going to make a new broker dealer change? You want to make sure that you've got the right partners in place to kind of build those that friendships and things like that going forward.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I think, another question that came up as you were talking was, make sure that the firm that you're working with is in this full time. It's not a part-time, hey, to your point, I got to make a few $1,000s this month. Make sure, and going back to last week's conversation with these few advisors that have worked with other third parties, they brought up a great point, and I think it's very valid, is our job is to act as their fiduciary just as they are to act as their client's fiduciary. And, when I was talking to these few individuals, my point to them was, the reason I'm here, the reason I'm going above and beyond is, and our team goes above and beyond is, we don't take it lightly that you're trusting your livelihoods in our hands, period. Because this is a roller coaster of emotions, and it's a stressful time. So, David, I'm going to ping pong this last topic since Sean's not here. Our audience, probably the biggest question, which I think is a really valid question and a difficult one to answer. How do you go about finding a third-party recruiting firm? I mean, it's not like you can go out there and Google third-party recruiting firm, because then you're going to have all these staffing recruiting firms. Throw a couple ideas out there for our audience of how do you even go about finding and starting to interview third-party recruiting firms?
That is a very good question, and you hit the nail on the head. It'd be easy if you could just go Google it and find them. There's a lot of big names that you've heard out there, and a lot of individuals that have been utilizing those services. But a lot of times, it's in our business. The sad part is it's going to be word of mouth. Working with advisors that have made transitions, coordinating with people regionally, locally, and maybe even talking to some of your competitors. If you know a large group or any advisors that have made a change in the last couple of years, ask them how they went about it. There's nothing wrong with that. When you're talking with new advisors, you're seeing at your current conferences that have made a move into your broker dealer, ask them, who they utilized. How did they go about finding this fit? Did they work with a third-party recruiter? Did they work with a consultant? Or did they work directly with the corporate recruiters? Those are questions that you want to ask. Because what you're going to find is, rather than trying to say, oh, I want to go do a Google search, find a name, look at a website, it's like, oh, that's great information, but go directly to the source. Find people that have worked with them in the past, work with some of their clients, and from there you're gonna find a much better fit on that side of it. But again, you can talk to a few third-party recruiting firms that are out there and get a feel for it, but just make sure you make mention that it's like, hey, I'm not sure who I'm going to work with yet. Don't send my name to anybody. I'm interviewing third-party recruiting firms to find out which one's going to be the best one for me. No different than any corporate recruiter or any recruiters like us going out there and talking with advisors. It's either it's a good fit or it's going to be a good relationship or not. So it's no different on that side of it. Maybe get a handful of them, get a few from your colleagues, go from there. And word of mouth is basically the best way to get that information is basically directly from the industry experts out there.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, I would say I would take it a step further of it's okay to go to your broker dealer and the corporate recruiter and say, hey, I'm looking to grow through recruiting. Can you give me some of your top tier third-party recruiting firms that you do business with? Obviously, you don't want to go to them and say, hey, I'm looking to make a move. But that's okay. I think, to your point, David, of asking your peers, as you're interviewing those third-party recruiting firms, ask them for people that they've worked with, that they've placed, to have that conversation without them on the phone, because that's really the proof is in the pudding, to where if they're hesitant or don't have names of people that they can give to you or want to be on the call, I'd be skeptical, because I mean, all of the clients we work with, I would have no problem with any one of our, prospective clients talking to our clients we work with. I mean, we pride ourselves on high touch, high service. So with that, we're going to wrap this week up. We're going to continue down this month of really digging into the weeds of third-party recruiting firms. And so if there's any questions you have, feel free to comment on our LinkedIn page. Please email us at info@trustedvisions.com. Follow us on YouTube on our Trusted Visions Placement and Consulting YouTube page. Thank you, David. As always, it's great to see you again. Everybody have a great week, and we look forward to digging into this further this month.